Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We're back with a live episode, live discussion of all the games that happened today, both of them. So we've got two eliminations to talk about, pretty much two off seasons to talk about, and also a couple of previews to also talk about. And I think we should kick it off with the most recent game that happened, which was the New York one, because what a series and what a close to it. Let's talk about it, man.
Obviously, if you just are joining the live stream, obviously you saw the night of NBA basketball we had significantly better than the previous one, or at least the second game was, right? So you had the Knicks closing out Philadelphia in Philadelphia, 118 to 115. Very back and forth game, kind of almost really the definition of the series. Actually, it's wild because the final point totals for the series was the Knicks scored 650 total. Sixers scored 649, so a difference of 1 point,
Right.
4-2. But this game was kind of emblematic of the series as a whole, right? Like, I mean, it's a little bit different because the Knicks stepped out to an 18, 20-point lead in the first quarter. Also, Homelander, I see your comments, SGA and Brunson for co-MVP, and Embiid to Cancun. So we'll get into that in a minute, obviously. But yeah, the Knicks went out and started off and built up a huge lead, right? The threes were falling. The Sixers looked bad, right? At home, they were getting blasted, getting booed. And then in the second quarter, it completely flipped, right? The Sixers bench came up big time, right? Embiid went out early in the first, right? Because you could tell he was kind of, just, again, like the most of the series, right? He was kind of laboring, not quite himself, although he had a much better bounce back game this time around. But the Sixers bench kind of led them back into the game. And they kept the lead for a good chunk of the second half, right? Until what was it, like early in the fourth, I think. And again, that was kind of the interesting thing going into this series where, the Knicks starters versus the Sixers bench, right? The Sixers just have more guys, but the Knicks 5 guys that they have, I mean, just have an incredible amount of energy. I mean, they've been playing like 45 minutes literally every game. I think DiVincenzo played all 48. And this was easily his best game in the series, right? He made some big shots, got some big free throws, including blocks and steals down the stretch. So just kind of wild, right? You look at the Sixers bench. Buddy Hield was dusted off the bench and had a great first half, right? He had, I think, 17 in the first half, only 3 in the second half. But his first half performance helped build up, the Sixer lead because they went up by as much as 10 in the third. And again, guys like Nick Batum, Cameron Payne had a couple of decent minutes, and then a couple of not so great ones. But, either way, he was okay. Lowry didn't do much. Tobias Harris had 0 points, right? That's also another tough part, right? In the game that the Sixers won the other night, Tobias Harris had 19.
Yeah.
And that's tough if you're the Sixers, right? Because this was a game where Joel Embiid was pretty good. I know he was a -2, but he still had a good game. Didn't do as much in the fourth, but, he did enough to get you there. Right? He didn't go out sad, I don't think, even though he did foul out, but he had 39 and 13 with a block. But then in the last game, which the Sixers won, he didn't play that well. But, again, it's just kind of wild, right? Because the Sixers bench was better than the Knicks bench, but you had some really bad performances from some of the Sixers starters. And that was kind of the difference in the fourth quarter, right? Because the Knicks starters got their second win because they looked gassed in the third, but they closed it out. You got a couple of stretches, right, where I think Brunson sat early in the fourth and they were able to not completely blow the lead, right? McBride came in and hit a 3. But either way, just a really impressive series victory for the Knicks and kind of a really unfortunate crushing series loss for the Sixers, right? Like we leaned the Knicks in this series because we thought with Embiid not quite being his normal self, that the Knicks would just probably have an edge because Brunson was probably going to end up being the best player in the series, right? And that's kind of what happened. But, at the same time, the Sixers did fight. They did battle because all of these games were very close. I mean, the final margin total was literally 1 point. But at the end of the day, the Knicks move on, and the Sixers go home. So I don't know, which angle you want to look at it first, but kind of give your thoughts on this game and this series as a whole, because this was easily the best series of the first round.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, amazing basketball from all around. I think from both sides, especially in this game, I think you saw a lot to like from both sides and a lot to really not like from both sides. You can kind of see why they're in the situations that they're both in, respectively. But I want to really start from Philly's perspective because I think, like you said, it's a tough way to go out. But you do have to give certain guys credit. I think, even though Maxey didn't play as well as he did in the last game, I think he did step up when they kind of needed him. Although at some points, New York, you could clearly tell that their game plan was more of an old school approach, where you're trying to look at Joel Embiid, let him have whatever he wants, and then you take Tyrese Maxey completely out of the game, or at least attempt to. So that's kind of the way that I feel about it. And then, even looking around like the other role players, like you were saying, Tobias Harris didn't show up at all. Other guys didn't really look that great. Like a campaign, he didn't show up. But I think, you have to give Buddy Hield some credit, too, because he kind of showed up when they needed him. It's just, unfortunately, they couldn't get the win, and they only lost by 3 points. So it's not like they got blown off the floor or anything like that. Super duper competitive. But I just didn't like their game plan defensively. And it all goes back to what I was talking about in game 3. Where you're looking at a guy like Brunson, and yeah, sure, you want to, make him uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean leaving guys wide open, because it came back to bite them once again. They left Josh Hart wide open again. And in this game, it doesn't really even make sense to me, because I know, like, he's not a guy that's going to, like, jack, but, he took 5 threes and made 3 of them. So it's not like he was bricking. At the time of him hitting pretty much the dagger, it was like he's like 2 for 4 or whatever, and he was just wide open at the top of the key, no respect. So that's kind of something that scares me about Philly's defensive scheme. Is kind of awkward, but that's what happens when you do throw 2 guys at the best player on the other team, especially when you have a guy like Brunson where he can kind of just find guys and they're gonna hit the shot. So it's a tough way to go out, like you said, but I mean, it's kind of what we expected, though. I think, just Joel Embiid not being himself, you can't really win a series like that. I don't think Tyrese Maxey is ready yet to be like a number 1 guy, especially if Joel Embiid isn't like fully healthy. I think he can at moments, but not consistently, and that's kind of what you saw in this game. Because if you have defenders all up in his grill, pressing him up the entire court, didn't even let him really touch the ball for the final possession, which you would have thought that they would have tried to do, but they took him out of the game completely towards the fourth quarter. So that's I think the biggest takeaway that you can have. But at least if you're looking at your offseason, you have a lot of flexibility. You can go star hunting if you want. You can definitely retool the bench, because I think during the regular season we were like, okay, yeah, they're deep, but a lot of these guys didn't really show up and produce. Like Paul Reed didn't do too much. Batum did good this game, but other games he wasn't really a factor.
Buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Like Buddy Hield, he showed up in this game, but in other games he was DNPing or just not even hitting his shots, So that's something I think to watch. But they can get deeper and they can get better, so it's not like the end of the road. But man, oh man, it puts a smile on my face to see Philly eliminated, if you want me to be real.
But then even when you look over at the Knicks side, I mean, like, they don't have Julius Randle. I mean, they lost Bojan Bogdanovic, right? To an injury, so he's not playing at all, right? I guess, so really when they made that trade at the trade deadline for Bogdanovic and Burks, they haven't gotten anything from those guys at all, right? Like, I mean, I think, what was it, Quentin Grimes they gave up. And I think he ended up having a season-ending injury, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But you got nothing out of that trade. Obviously, I guess you got more minutes for Deuce McBride, right? Who was pretty good in this series, right? He wasn't as good in this game, but he was big in, a lot of the other games on both ends of the floor, right? Kind of almost like a juiced up version of Patrick Beverley, right? A juiced up, more ethical version of Patrick Beverley, kind of, right? If you know what I mean?
Sure.
So, like, I don't know, but going back to Philadelphia, Embiid should not have played the Homelander. I mean, the issue is that, if he's available to play, like, all these guys are going to want to play, right? Like, for the most part, these guys, love doing what they do. And when they're in, the playoffs and it's do or die, with a chance to advance, to the next round, like, a lot of these guys are going to try to gut it out, right? Like, remember Kevin Durant, against the Raptors, right? Where he had the calf injury. They're down 3-1, right? He comes back and immediately the Warriors look like, oh, this is the team that probably would, where they would probably beat Toronto if he was healthy. But then he ends up tearing his Achilles. So, there's arguments for both. But it's difficult, right? It's tough because, like say with Kawhi Leonard, he's not playing at all. But in the games he played, it's kind of wild because he doesn't have, I don't think, a torn meniscus, but he looked a lot worse than Embiid.
Mm-hmm.
In these games, I know Embiid was kind of up and down, but like, as a whole, like, he was solid. You know what I mean? Like, he had a 50-point game. Obviously, in this game, he ended up having, 39 in elimination. Had some other not as great games, but either way, just kind of weird. But I don't know what Philly does because, like you said, with the Harden trade, they have a lot of flexibility. They're going to have cap space. I don't really know who's going to want to come to this situation personally, just because I think there's so many questions up in the air. Because of the fact that again, you have a scenario with Embiid where he's just not healthy, and he's not himself, and this is kind of what tends to happen every postseason. It's kind of why it's hard to really, you know, believe in Philadelphia's ability to advance, right? Like we had them as a dark horse, but then going into the series, we didn't even have them winning because we just knew if Embiid's not 100%, they probably can't really win because in order for them to win, he's going to have to be the best player on the floor, and that's just kind of hard to do coming back from a torn meniscus. I know Towns had his and came back, and I think he tore his earlier or no later than Embiid,
Yeah.
but still a little bit of a different thing. He's not 7 feet 280. And he's also not quite 30 yet. So with other significant injuries, right? It's just a little bit different. But I don't know because they do have cap space. Tobias Harris, I'm assuming, has played his last game as a Sixer, and it definitely felt like it. When you watched him play, he didn't really do much. He only took 2 shots in a do or die game 6. I don't know how you play 30 minutes and have only 2 shot attempts and 0
especially
points.
as an offensive guy.
Yeah, yeah, especially when that's kind of your best thing. I don't know what happened to him because it's like I know he's not like an amazing player, but like I don't know. I never thought he was like this bad, where it's just like he just doesn't even look good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the role he does. I think the other frustrating part is he made 40 million this season. And so I mean he's basically, if not their highest paid player, their second highest paid player. And so if one of your highest paid guys gives you literally a goose egg, I mean, what do you even do? I mean, they had 2 starters who didn't score. Um, but I don't know, right? Like, because some of those guys are going to be gone. Maxi's awesome. So I think obviously he's going to get paid a ton of money in the offseason, and he
100%.
deserves it. Like I said, he wasn't amazing in this game, but they wouldn't even be here if he didn't have the game 5 that he ended up having. And he was overall good in this series, I think, for the most part, right? So,
Yeah.
but I don't know, because like, who's coming here, right? Because I know people have mentioned names like Paul George or Klay Thompson, or maybe they trade for somebody and just absorb the cap space. But like, who is it? Like, I don't know. And because you still have the issue of, okay, if Embiid's just not going to have a fully healthy season, which probably just isn't going to change at this point because he's 30, and that's not going to get better as you get older. I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't try. I just don't necessarily know what player feels like I should come here. Boxers, I'm assuming Sixers. I'm
Yeah.
assuming he meant Sixers really need to blow up their roster. I
Hmm.
mean,
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't agree.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, maybe if they had lost game 5 and they just gone out sad, because that would have
Right.
been bad. Maybe they would have been like, all right, let's just blow it up. But I don't really see much of a reason to do it. Like I don't know, because like ultimately, I guess you can kind of say, well, not kind of. I think you can definitively say the process was a failure. Not the process as in Embiid, but just the process, because I know that's his nickname. But the process is in the era,
Yeah.
right? Because they think for several seasons, just basically was just like, we don't care if we win games at all. We're just gonna lose, 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 right? No real accountability whatsoever for really anybody, and I feel like that's kind of impacted like a lot of the players over the course of the, years of guys that they've had on this roster. And it's like you only got one guy. Now you got a guy that's clearly a superstar talent, but then you look at the rest of the picks, right? It was like Nerlens Noel, Jahlil Okafor, right? Ben Simmons, who was good, but just doesn't exist anymore. Markel Fultz. Who else? I mean, like, just
That's pretty much
can't
it.
even think. Pretty much it. Like, and none of them panned out, right? Like Simmons was good for a while, but you could also tell he just didn't really fit next to Embiid as a point guard. But either way, that's the tough part because like that's why it's so hard to build through the draft because first off you have to find the guy, and they did find the guy, but they couldn't really find anybody else. I mean, they've tried, right? Because they had Simmons, they brought in Harden, now they have Maxey. So I think at the very least you can say, okay, that duo is really good. So you try to retool around that. So I don't think you necessarily have to blow it up. I just don't necessarily know if they can actually win it all because I just don't necessarily trust that they're going to be healthy for a season. New coach, same result. Yeah, I mean, that's that. Yeah, basically. I mean, like, to be fair, like, he did do some good things, I think, in this series. There were some mistakes as well. Um, I don't know, like some of them like are kind of 50-50 ones. Like I can't remember which game it was. It was either game 3 or 4, where I think Embiid played the whole second half and he just didn't have it, and then they ended up losing the game. Like I don't know. I don't know. That's kind of a tough thing to do. I
especially
mean,
when he's hobbled.
yeah, especially when he's already hobbled. Like you said, some of the Brunson stuff in terms of how they guarded him. I mean, I understand, like you said, use length, try to blitz him and trap him. But then, like you said, it's kind of like the issue with the Nuggets, where if you blitz and trap, Jokic or Murray, like that's going to lead to wide open shots for other guys. And I guess, like Brunson, to his credit, did make some tough shots. It wasn't like it wasn't like all of his shots were open. A lot of them were well defended, and he made them.
Yeah.
But like you said, that defensive possession was just brutal because they paid so much attention to Brunson. And like you said, Hart has been kind of a spotty 3-point shooter the last couple of seasons. But in this series, he shot the three pretty well. I know he had a couple of bad offensive games, but for the most part, he shot the ball significantly better than I think he did in last year's postseason.
He's not
Which
afraid to
is
shoot anymore.
exactly, and that's huge, right? Because he was a good 3-point shooter coming into the league, right? Like I remember him on the Lakers. He was like close to 40% in a couple of those seasons, and then he just dropped off and just dropped off. Some of that I'm sure probably just has to do with legs because he plays hard every possession. Um, but yeah, like you said, there was kind of becoming a stretch where he just was passing up open looks and kind of just playing the Draymond role where he's just like at the top of the 3-point line, kind of just looking to distribute and hand it off. But he was fearless in this series, so that was a big part. Obviously, Brunson's the biggest factor. But yeah, like it does suck if you're Philly because you got a new coach and it's the same result, like you said. So that definitely is true. But I think that also speaks to what is the real ceiling of this group. Like I think that's really the real issue because they have changed a lot of stuff, right? Like they've changed the roster decent amount. They've changed the co-stars a decent amount, and they changed the coaches multiple times. And it's still been the same thing every year where like somebody's hurt, usually Embiid, then they lose either in the first or the second round, and then they go home. And then they have questions about what are we going to do again?
Yeah,
So, I mean,
it's the same script.
I mean,
And we tried to warn you guys at the beginning of the season. Like, this is kind of how we felt. We were like, it's going to be the same thing. It doesn't matter how well Embiid plays. He can win MVP all he wants, but is he going to really show up in the postseason? And in his defense, he was hurt. He was injured, clearly, with 2 injuries. You can't, there's no skirting around the fact that he's playing on a surgically repaired knee and he has Bell's palsy in his face. You can't skirt around the fact that those are things that exist. But, like, at the end of the day, it's still the same result.
yeah. And now, I guess the other question that we ask is, should they have traded James Harden? I guess you had to, given the fact that he didn't show up, but
Mhm.
like, end up actually being a positive trade for Philly. Because we look, because when we first talked about it, we liked the trade more for Philly than the Clippers. But now when you look at, how things have panned out, although the Clippers may go out in the first round as well, I mean, Harden is still good. JE needs new fitness and nutrition help. I mean, I think that's
True.
kind of the other thing. Where it's like, obviously Jokic hasn't had the same, just crushing injuries as Joel Embiid. But like when you watch him play, even though he doesn't, physically look like he's in that good of shape, right? He kind of has like a average person's build, kind of,
Yeah.
right? Like somebody that you wouldn't think would be an NBA player, but he runs up and down the floor a lot. He plays hard. He plays a ton of minutes. Even though he might look like he's laboring around, he's really not.
No.
And obviously, he's thinking a lot as well. So I mean, that I don't know if he's gonna ask him like, hey, what do you do in the off season? Because they are different players, different builds, also
Rivals.
very different. Yeah, right. Also very different play styles as well, right? Because I think Embiid, does a little bit like I don't know how to describe it, but it's just like I feel like his style of play when he's like doing the self lobs and kind of jumping a lot more is probably like just gonna lend itself more to injury.
Well, he's also
Than
way more athletic.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other factor. But yeah, like that's the main issue is that like how can you get this guy to be in the best shape he can be in the playoffs, and have an injury-free season? Because
Yeah.
if he was fully healthy, he might be better. I know there were some postseasons where like it wasn't like this, but he still wasn't great, right? Like I think going back to the Toronto series where they lost in 7,
Hmm.
and I think he had a game that he missed because he was sick or whatever. But like if you look at the series, he shot like 37% from the field. But at the same time, that was like 5 years ago, right? Where it's like you can say, okay, he's getting better. He's gotten better every year. So you give credit to that. But I just don't really know what Philly can really do because you're building around a guy that you just can't necessarily trust by the end of the season. Either whether it's physical or mental or whatever. Like I don't really know, but that's kind of the tough part. So I can understand the argument of like blowing up the roster. I don't know if you mean blowing it up by like trading Embiid and just like starting from scratch. Like I wouldn't do that, but who knows? I mean, like going into the season, people were wondering, like when he was talking about, how frustrated he was, like maybe they trade him. Like there was lots of talks about, oh, maybe he gets traded to the Knicks because he's got some really good relationships there. I mean, Knicks fans, I feel like hate his guts now. I mean, like going
Yeah.
through a lot of Knicks communities online and just listening to a lot of Knicks fans talk like on other podcasts and shows, like they are not huge fans of that guy. I mean, like it's something, which is just
Yeah.
kind of wild because I don't know how they really felt about him going into the series because it's not like the Sixers and the Knicks have really had much rivalries like since 40 years ago. But it's kind of wild. Homelander says I would trade him, TBH. I just don't think they will. It's kind of like the Trey Young situation where it's like they're not going to trade him unless he asks out. I don't think
Yeah.
it's going to be a situation where Philly's just like, all right, we can't win with this guy. Let's get rid of him. I
Yeah.
think it's just going to be, I can't win here, so I want to be gone. But then you have to ask the question of like, what's the actual legitimate trade package for him? Where does he go? Where does he want to go? Like, I that there's so many questions there, but I don't think he's going anywhere at least right now because
Yeah.
to be fair, like before he got hurt, they were really good. So maybe you just kind of factor in, okay, maybe you run it back and retool. If he doesn't tear his meniscus again, you'll probably win more games and not be a 7 seed and not have to play, a quality team in the first round. Maybe you're the 1, 2, or 3 seed and you're playing, one of those other lower seeds in the first round. But just bad luck, honestly. So I
Yeah.
mean,
And
but this happens every year. So
yeah, and it's like to go back to your original question about the whole James Harden thing, like, and if that trade was good or bad for Philly, I think it's still good because at the end of the day, Joel Embiid got hurt. You can't really control that, and you went into this series as a 7 seed, right? And that's kind of different than what they were last year, And like you talked about, looking at the Clippers, they're not in a much better situation. So it's like it's tough to look at, but I think you can't really say that the James Harden trade was a mistake because just the fact that they're playing the 2 seed, I think that's a huge factor because this New York team is underrated at this point for sure. And I think we can probably start to talk about New York a little bit more.
absolutely.
Because, I mean, at this point, what can't Jalen Brunson do? Complete takeover in the fourth quarter, like you said, hitting tough shots, getting to the line as he's normally able to do, amazing touch, able to use his body. It doesn't really make sense, especially for a guy that small and that's slow, to be honest. He's not a fast downhill guy, He picks apart the defense methodically. It may sound like I'm glazing, but I'm really just spitting facts at this point. Maxey benefited from Harden's exit 100%, and I think it kind of is similar to a Chris Paul SGA kind of thing, where it's like you could clearly see that they took some things from each other's games for sure. And I think James Harden being there to help Tyrese Maxey, I think it also kind of lifted the ceiling. I think for Tyrese Maxey, it opened up plenty of opportunities for him to show out and show why he was picked so high and where he was picked and why Philly even picked him in the first place. Because I think it is a great fit next to Embiid. Because I think we saw multiple games during the regular season, even in the postseason, where he's a perfect complement. It's just I think with age, he's probably going to get more consistent and definitely better all around for sure.
Yeah, because you have to factor in, like, Embiid prefers to play a more half-court style, slower pace, but Maxey doesn't mind speeding it up, and that can kind of help, in the playoffs, right? Like when we saw the Clippers and the Mavs play, and the Mavs were able to play at a faster pace. And even though you can't do that, like, over the course of an entire game, there's stretches where it helps, especially, like, during the middle parts of the game, or, like, maybe the early portions of the fourth quarter, where you kind of just need to do whatever you can to kind of score, right? It's not quite as organized. It's a little bit more out of control, because usually that's where the second units are playing as opposed to the starters. So Brunson Burner lights up Sixers. Yeah, I mean, that was really the big key in this series, which, that's kind of how it goes a lot of times for these playoff series is who's the best player on the floor. And even though
Insane.
Embiid had a solid And even though Embiid had a good series, right? Brunson was better. Obviously he's healthier, so that's one factor. But either way, that's what tends to happen. And for the Knicks, it's funny, right? Because they won that last game of the regular season, and everybody was like, "What are you guys doing?" Because you're going to be the 2 seed. You're probably going to play the Sixers, and you might lose in the first round. But guess what? That was probably the best thing they could have asked for because you took care of the Sixers, albeit you did lose some guys. And now you played the Indiana Pacers, who are just probably a more winnable matchup than Boston. Not that the Knicks are guaranteed to win, right? But they have a better chance of beating Indiana than beating Boston. And you
Yeah.
might go to the conference finals. And like if you go to the conference finals without Julius Randle, that's like quite an accomplishment, right? Because that's a guy that's a 20 point per game scorer that you can kind of tell in a lot of these stretches they do miss having him because of the fact that there are stretches where they just literally cannot score because they don't have any, real go-to secondary creators,
Look at this
outside of
game.
Brunson.
Like
Yeah, because look at
the bench, like
right,
pretty much 5 points from them in total. Albeit the
exactly,
starters
right,
played amazing. Not,
right.
flawlessly, but very good basketball.
Yeah, because like in the starting five, like other than Brunson, occasionally DiVincenzo, but he wasn't great for most of the series. Hart beats up Sixers like a drum. Yeah, that's the other punishing part. That's the other key for the Knicks is that they just played a lot more scrappy, a lot harder. Like they've kind of made the Sixers. I'm not calling them a soft team, but it made them look a little bit more soft, right? Where it's like the
Knicks
Knicks are
wanted it
getting
for more, for sure.
yeah, every offensive rebound, every loose 50-50 ball, usually went the Knicks' way. And that's a big key to a series like this where every game was close and it's going to come down to a handful of possessions, right? Because the Knicks didn't shoot great from the field in a lot of these games. Um, obviously in this game they shot 46 from the field and 45 from three, which is big, but they also, when you look at the amount of shots, they got several more shots than the Sixers, right? And part of that is getting offensive rebounds, occasionally forcing turnovers. So that's huge. But yeah, for the Knicks, this is the best case scenario. And, because again, you won this matchup. Obviously, it was very taxing. But again, going into the second round, it's just a more favorable matchup. And you still have home court. And if you win that, you go to the conference finals, and anything can happen, right? We already know Porzingis is hurt. Nobody's saying the Knicks are going to go to the NBA finals, but you know, considering this team was kind of put together a little bit late, right? It was done in like December or whatever, right? Because it's different from the team that began the season, right? No RJ Barrett, no Emmanuel quickly, right? But instead it's OG Anunoby, who, had some big moments in this series, right? Like he was
Even in
eight for
this
7.
game.
Yeah, in this game, he had some big plays, including the poster on Embiid. Had some big key rebounds, steals, and blocks. I like the fact that by the end of the game, he's kind of stopped settling for jumpers. Like he was 2 of 5 from three, which isn't bad at all. But he had a few spots where he was like wide open at the 3 point line, ran all the way down for a basket. Which is key, right?
He
Because
did it
it's
in the
like
corner and at the top of the
yeah,
key for the poster.
exactly. So I mean, that's kind of the key for the Knicks is the way they play in terms of the no pun intended, the heart, the hustle, the toughness, right? Like that can sometimes help you like against a team that probably is a little more talented in Philly.
Hmm.
But either way, hats off to the Knicks because they grabbed this series and they kind of showed like this is why we won that last game against Chicago, right? Because we wanted the 2 seed, we weren't scared of Philly, and now we're moving on to the next round while Philadelphia goes home and has to wonder what they do in the offseason. Because for the Knicks, like if they lose the series, it wouldn't be as bad as Philly because the Knicks can just be like, they had some tough breaks like Philly, but also like this is year one essentially, or I guess year 1.5 of like their new, core
I
basically,
would say
right?
year
It's like,
one at this point.
yeah, year one or year point 5, whatever you want to call it. So
For
it's
real.
like, you wouldn't call it a lost season if you lost in the first round. It would be crushing if you blew a 3-1 lead, but it just, it wouldn't be quite as disastrous as Philly going out in round one because the Knicks weren't going into the year looking to win a title. I mean, obviously, like maybe if Randall was healthy, they would have done better. Maybe they actually come out of the East. I don't know. But they're obviously biding their time, for that next star who wants out. And they're going to have a lot of picks. I don't know how many assets they're going to necessarily have, but they will have picks. And, they probably won't mind giving up some of these guys, like if they absolutely have to, right? Like obviously you'd like to keep the Villanova guys together, but if it's like, if it comes between that versus like somebody else, maybe you do it. I don't know. Knicks will have trouble keeping pace with the Pacers. So yeah, so let's get into that second game. Bucks Pacers, right? This
Yeah.
was one where again, we expected I think both teams to close out the series.
Mm-hmm.
I was 50-50 on Knicks Sixers and
Mm-hmm.
this was literally a 50-50 game, but I was pretty confident like you that Indiana was going to, lock in and close it out. I mean they did 120-98 blowout, pretty much what you expected. Lillard played, and he was okay. 7 of 16, 28 points, 4 assists. So, he wasn't bad at all, right? For a do or die elimination game, he was fine. Lopez, Portis, Middleton wasn't great, but he was good in the other games. He just didn't have enough, right? And that's kind of what the series came down to, right? You didn't have Giannis. You lost Lillard for a game. Um, and that's brutal, right? Your two best players were not really close to 100%, for most of the series. And in fact, your best player wasn't available at all. You took the Pacers to 6, right? So obviously that's a pretty respectable first round loss, but it's tough if you're Milwaukee because you won the title just what, 3 seasons ago. And since then, you lost in the second round. Obviously, Chris Middleton was hurt, right? I think they beat Boston if Middleton was healthy because I think he got hurt against Chicago. And I think they would have gone to the finals. And you never know. Maybe they beat that Golden State team. Who knows? And then obviously they went out in the first round last year with the Giannis injury. And then you have a Giannis injury again, except this time before the playoffs. Um, and for Milwaukee, it's just brutal, right? Because it felt like the whole year was kind of a disappointment. But you hope that with Doc Rivers, he could kind of fix some things and turn it up. They brought in Patrick Beverly. But they were just basically average, right? Like while he was coaching, they were basically 500. Obviously, they had a lot of stretches where one or two or all three of their main guys were out. So that hurts. And it obviously hurt them in the playoffs. Pacers get swept. We'll get to that momentarily. But that's the thing. Like, so for the Bucks, it just sucks because it feels like a lost year. Um, and the thing that's weird is that outside of Giannis, none of the other guys on this roster are really that young, right? Like Middleton's getting up there. I mean, he played well in this series. Definitely had a bounce back for sure. So he showed that he can still play. But he is 32 and now he's got a little bit of an injury. Um, Portis was good in this series, right? And overall had a good season, right? So I assume he probably hangs around unless they have to trade him. Lopez, even though he was 35, right? He was fine in this series. We know defensively it's kind of a tough matchup against Miles Turner because he just can't close out onto the perimeter. And he looked a little slow this season, I think, but he still was a decent player. Just how many more good years of Brook Lopez do you get? I don't know, right? Lillard's regular season was uneven, but in the playoffs before he got hurt, he was relatively fine. I mean, like obviously there's no Giannis, so that changes, a lot, right? Because he was brought in to be a co-star, not, the absolute go-to guy. Um, but either way, after that, I don't know what else you do, right? Like Gallinari, I don't know. Malik Beasley, I don't know. Pat Connaughton, I don't really know. I mean, even their young guys. I mean, Andre Jackson Jr. fine, solid rookie year, right? The guy that we didn't really know what we were going to get from him.
Yeah.
Um, and then Beauchamp, I don't know. I mean, Chris Livingston, who I didn't even realize was on the roster. I think he was drafted. Wasn't he like the last pick of the draft or something like that?
I believe
Crazy.
he's Mr. Irrelevant.
And then Jay Crowder was a DNP. So I mean, then that was a guy that was on the team last year. Bucks put up a good fight, provided Pacers with a fresh venison meal. All right, but they did put up a good fight.
I
Like
was not expecting
without,
the word venison. That's funny.
yeah, I mean, like without Giannis, you don't expect to win the series, which I think is why we definitely thought Indiana was going to win the series, right? Like I would have leaned Milwaukee, if Giannis was healthy, but without Giannis, you just knew Indiana was going to win the series. It did go 6, so I don't know how great that makes you feel about Indiana. I mean, there were some positives because there were a lot of guys that came off the bench that I think played pretty well in this series, right? Like McConnell was very bad in the previous game, but in most of the other games, he played very well, and he was great in this game. I mean, he honestly was better than Halliburton, who was fine in this game, right? But wasn't amazing. And then after that, right, you got some decent minutes from other guys like Ben Shepherd, Obi Toppin off the bench was great, right? And it's kind of hard, right? Because you're replacing some of that bench scoring that Benedict Mathurin gave you with other guys. But I guess you could also say like you're not really trying. It could potentially be better right now, only because like you're not really ceding possessions, to a second year guy. You're kind of just like we're gonna let TJ McConnell run the second unit. and we're gonna just spread the floor with some shooters and athletes and see what happens. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're better without Benedict Mathurin, but obviously,
Right.
like they got the win with him, or excuse me, without him.
Yeah.
And then Siakam, right? Like this is why you traded for him. He had a couple of bad games, but by and large, he was good in this series, right? He was great in the first two games. Um, Andrew Nemhard, right? Obviously when they made the Siakam trade, Bruce Brown was in that starting spot, right? And now it's Andrew Nemhard, who's been really good, right, on both ends of the floor. Kind of provides like I don't know, like a slower pace, more like classic guard next to Halliburton, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And he can still play off the ball or on the ball. Turner was bad in this game, but also was in foul trouble. But he was overall really good in this series. Neesmith, was kind of up and down, but in this game obviously was good. So I don't know what's going to happen, but if you're the Pacers, obviously this is your first playoff victory since what 2014 or whatever it
Yeah.
was, right?
Since
That
the
was the Paul
PG
George,
one. Yeah.
yeah, that was the Paul George, era with Frank Vogel.
Yeah.
Um,
Roy Hibbert, Lance
yeah,
Stevenson, all that.
yeah, yeah, we'll see. But I mean, obviously, the Knicks are going into this series with only 7 guys, whereas Indiana has a very deep team. Um, and even without Mathurin and can play up and down, right? Whereas the Knicks, probably are a little bit better in the half court just because of how good Brunson is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like the series may be a toss up. It feels like Indiana has more like good players, I think, just because they have like, when they're not playing 11 guys, like it feels like they have like, I guess 8-ish players that they're relatively comfortable playing, right? The starting five, McConnell, Toppin, and then, either Shepard or Isaiah Jackson, probably more so Shepard just because he's like a 3-and-D guy. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Like going into the series, Homelander says Pacers get swept. I don't know. I mean,
Mm,
like the Knicks will obviously have home court, so that's a huge advantage for the Knicks. But who knows? Like, I mean, the Pacers, their style of play could be interesting, right? Because the Knicks don't have a stretch five, right? They have two more classic like pick and roll bigs um, that don't really space the floor. Obviously, Hardenstein's got the floater, but then you also factor in the Knicks are gonna probably still get a lot of offensive rebounds against the Pacers. I would think, due to the activity. But also, the Pacers are a more athletic team than Milwaukee, right? And I think a more athletic team than Philly.
yeah.
So at the same time, I don't know because matchups make fights. So and also the Pacers defensively, what does it look like against the Knicks? Because how are they going to slow down Brunson? Does a guy like DiVincenzo, who was mediocre in this series, just pop off because the Pacers can't really get stops? Does Josh Hart continue to get every offensive rebound? Does OG Anunoby all of a sudden just, kind of just pop off? You just don't know, right? Or even like a Deuce McBride. The Knicks don't have as many guys, but they clearly are the, more tough physical team. So I don't know. Like, who do you lean in this series? Because I think, there's a case to be made for both. But obviously, like, I can understand the Homelanders' take on the Pacers maybe not being the favorites because of the fact that it's like, okay, you went 6 without Giannis and then barely a healthy Damian Lillard. So what is it going to look like when you play the Knicks? But the Knicks aren't healthy either. But at least you can say they have their best player, right? And at least you can probably say, would it be a shocker if Jalen Brunson was the best player on the floor again? Like, probably not.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think about like the history that both of these franchises actually have versus each other.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to be funny here, but this is a real headline from back in the day: Hicks versus Knicks. It was a real thing where like it's like small town people versus the city people, and that's kind of wild. Like I think we even had like the Reggie Miller thing from
Yep.
back in the day with John Starks, all kinds of stuff. So and Reggie, the Knicks, they're a funny team, funny franchise because I think they always find a way to villainize a lot of people. They villainize Reggie Miller. They're trying to do it with Joel Embiid, but in terms of this series, I don't know. I really don't know how this is gonna go because I think Indiana is so inconsistent, but when they play their best basketball, they're borderline one of the most unstoppable teams on offense, which is kind of scary. But I think I'm going to have to lean with New York because if you want me to be real, as much as I did like what I saw from the Pacers and how they were able to close the series, I haven't been impressed with Halliburton. And I don't know what's wrong with him per se, but like if he continues to play at this level going into this Knicks series, then I think Indiana's going to have a serious problem because I think they really need him to play his best basketball for them to be the best version of themselves. And I think you need to be the best version of yourself if you're going to be playing a team like New York, because we already know they're going to fight tooth and nail for every little free throw, every rebound, every steal, everything. So I feel like New York is probably hungrier than Indiana. So I'm probably going to go with New York. And also, the upper end talent on the roster clears Indiana at this point, I think. Outside of, like, because, I mean, if you look at Tyrese Halliburton and Siakam, like, regular season-wise, I think you could say they're better, I guess, than the Knicks. But, like, the other guys, I'm looking at, like, Josh Hart. I don't think Indiana really has a Josh Hart. But then the Pacers, like, the X factor for them is, like, their bench. Because, like, McConnell is amazing. Like, if McConnell was the best player on the court in this game, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but he outplayed Dame and he outplayed Halliburton, which is scary. But I don't think he can outplay like a Jalen Brunson. You know, that's the thing that's kind of like making me frustrated in terms of how to pick here. But I think I'm still just going to lean with New York because I think they're starting 5 or their 7 guys that they're going to rotate in and out. I just like them better. And I think they could potentially get out-coached here in terms of the Pacers. I think they're going to get out-coached by Thibs. But we'll see. I'm just going to go with the Knicks, though. I'd probably say, like, Knicks in 5 or 6, maybe? I don't want to be, like, too pretentious or anything, but, like, 6, I think.
I'm kind of with you where it's, like, the Knicks, you know, after the 5, it gets kind of scary. And then also, like, Mitchell Robinson, physically, what does he look like? You know, I don't know, right? Because, you know, there were times in this series where you could tell he was hobbled with his ankle. New York stand up, too tough for Pacers. And I think that's kind of where we're all leaning. You know, like the Homelander, I think, is on the more extreme side in terms of the Pacers getting swept. But I feel like everybody so far in this live stream kind of feels like the Knicks are probably just like the better team. Or at the very least, they have the most talented player, right? Because I think it's just kind of weird because Halliburton, earlier in the season, before that injury, looked like the best guard in the Eastern Conference and honestly looked like a top 5 player, right? Like,
For sure.
He would have been all NBA first team, but he just hasn't been, right? He hasn't been bad. But like you said, if the Pacers are going to win this series, I think you're going to need a better version of Halliburton because, like, even though the Knicks don't have, like, 3 stars players like Milwaukee, where it's like they have, Giannis, who didn't even play, right? But like Lillard, Middleton, Lopez, Portis, like those are all solid players. But if Jalen Brunson outplays, Tyrese Halliburton by a decent amount, which is very possible, right? Because, I don't think the Pacers have the same type of defenders that the Sixers had, right? Like the Sixers, they're using Kelly Oubre, who's not really known for his defense, but he's like a long athletic guy.
Yeah.
And then they were putting like Nicholas Batum on him, right? Again, who's, a little bit different from Oubre because he's not as athletic. But
and he's very slow.
Yeah, but also like a very smart, like skilled defensive player.
Sure.
Whereas like with the Pacers, they don't have as many lengthy guys, right? It's just kind of just, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's just like more, maybe like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Like, because like Aaron Nesmith is a solid 2-way guy. But is he going to be better defensively than what the Sixers have? Like, maybe. Because like he's probably the guy, unless it's Nembhard. Like it might be like Nembhard and Nesmith tag teaming, but then, I don't know. Because then the issue is that like if you look from the Pacers side, like their bigs are probably better than New York's bigs, right? Because like you have Pascal Siakam, and Miles Turner, but then like the Knicks basically went through a series where their bigs were in foul trouble literally every game, right? So like I doubt in this series that those guys are going to get into foul trouble quite as much. Just because like Miles Turner is more of a stretch big, but then that means that those guys are going to have to stand out on the perimeter. But then it's like Joel Embiid, is okay with taking some jumpers. So I don't know. Like you said, I would probably lean New York, but I don't know. I don't really know how to feel about it. Like I don't feel quite as like confident about it as like Knicks over Philly. You know what I mean? Because it's just like the Pacers, even though they don't have a Joel Embiid, like they have just I think like probably like a better 1 through 8 than Philly, like with a hobbled Embiid. But then like Halliburton, I don't know. Like that's kind of the key because I don't know what version of him I'm getting, and I don't necessarily know if the Pacers win the series if Halliburton plays like how he played in this series. And he wasn't bad, but I think we were probably a little bit let down in some of those games. Like there were games where he was good. Like he had the big game winner, um, obviously, and I think it was game 4 or whatever it was. But, I feel like you'd like to see a little bit more. Can he create separation, with the jumper? Because it feels like if he's, isn't like relatively open, like he's probably just not going to shoot it. So I wonder how aggressive he is. But I don't know, right? Because like the Knicks defensively, I feel like probably can put up a better fight than what the Bucks could do.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. I don't think people realize how pivotal this series is gonna be. I think
Yeah,
it's one where you don't really know what's gonna happen due to the fact that both these teams can be a little inconsistent. And the thing that worries me is like, I think this is going to be one of those series where it may not be as entertaining, I think, as the 76ers one, just because I feel like with the Pacers, it's more so they either blow somebody out or they get blown out,
yeah,
which isn't the most entertaining. Definitely not the best product, I think, to put out there. But with the Pacers, they can be a threat, and that's kind of what worries me. If you're the Knicks, is really limiting their offense and slowing them down, because everybody on this team is prone to catch fire if they're hitting. But
he'll
problem
be
is,
topping 20 points off the bench.
exactly, and like he's taken 10 threes. I normally Obi Toppin doesn't strike me as the guy that is going to jack up 10 threes, but hey, he did his job, and he was efficient from the field in general. So,
Little revenge series, by the way, because he was drafted by New York and they just
hmm
basically dumped him, to Indiana for nothing. I don't
yeah,
think they got anything back. Maybe like a second rounder, but he was their lottery pick, and he's played well for the Pacers this season. He initially was their starter before they got Siakam, and now he's transitioned into more of a sixth man energy guy, which I think is a good role for him, probably better than him as a starter.
yeah,
So I do kind of wonder because, like you said, it's either going to be a Pacers game where they win by like 20 plus, or they end up getting destroyed, because it really is a lot of it's predicated, like you said, on their offense. Because if they're hitting threes and they're getting out and running after every basket, whether or not it's a make or a miss, they're going to score a ton of points, right? Like that's not really how the Knicks play. They play a lot slower, a lot more, I don't know, methodical. So if the Knicks slow down Indiana, then that's probably better for the Knicks, right? Because I don't think, because the Pacers, if it's a slow down game and it's a lot more half court offense, what does it look like? That's probably where Siakam is really key, right? Because he's a lot more comfortable in those type of spots because he's been in the playoffs a lot. Whereas the other guys are a little bit more limited in what they can do, right? Like, you don't really want Aaron Nesmith trying to create off the dribble. Miles Turner, you don't really want him taking step back threes, at the end of the clock. But I don't know, right? Because Indiana's at its best when they're free flowing and they're playing fast. Not as much when they're slow. Not that they can't win a half court style game, but that's when they're at their best. So the Knicks' best chance is they're going to have to slow the game down. They're going to have to do what they did against the Sixers, where they're going to crash the boards. Which again, the Pacers are going to probably do that at times, where they're going to give up offensive boards. But who knows? But I feel like we're all probably like leaning towards New York because, like, I mean, that was a dogfight of a series, and I don't know if you're gonna get that from the Pacers,
no,
just because it's like it's not Joel Embiid, Tyrese Halliburton, But then at the same time, who knows? So because I mean, Embiid was solid in the series, and then Maxey was just a killer, right? But like with Indiana, are you gonna get that? I don't know. Like
I don't think so.
but to be fair, they have more balanced
Yeah.
offensive attack.
Like, I think
So
we're
it's
probably going to see like more team basketball from the Pacers, because I think with Philly it was more so like talent versus talent, when in the Knicks versus 76ers. But it is kind of crazy to think like the last time that these two teams met in the playoffs was 2013 Eastern Conference semifinals. Actually, that was when the Roy Hibbert Paul George team played against Melo, and I think that was when Roy Hibbert got the wild block on
Yep.
Melo. So revenge game for New York in this one, or revenge series, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, I see on Bleacher Report betting somebody needed Joel Embiid to score one more point to get 118,000. So,
Oh dang,
yikes.
yeah,
But
yeah, that's crazy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just kind of funny. And then obviously the winner of this series presumably plays Boston. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. But obviously, we know on the other side of the Eastern bracket, we got Boston waiting for the winner of the Cavs Magic series. And obviously, we have two games tomorrow, right? That we have to, kind of discuss for a little bit. So we got Cavs Magic game 6 in Orlando, right? Obviously, Cleveland wins. They go on to the second round to play Boston. Orlando wins. You got a game 7 that will be in Cleveland. And then obviously, same deal with Clippers Mavs, where Mavs win. They move on to the second round to play Oklahoma City, right? The Homelanders team. Um, or if the Clippers win, you go back to LA for a game 7 at the crypto.com arena. So it's going to be interesting, right? Because obviously for the Clippers, this could potentially be their last, series where they play in that crypto.com arena. But who are you taking in these two games? Because
Mm,
I feel like this series has been really difficult to kind of like get a feel for and predict because there's
yeah.
been so many weird stretches where like Cavs Magic, we picked opposite, right? Like we both picked Cleveland initially, and then you switched to the Magic,
Hmm.
and I think that kind of shows that like these two teams are very evenly matched, even though they're very different teams. We both we both lean towards the Mavs, especially with Kawhi's injury situation. So it's possible that you know, that both picks could be right, or one. So I don't really know, but what do you think is going to happen in these game sixes? Do you think that the team's up 3-2 close it out, or do you think that we end up going to a game 7? For these teams.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a bold prediction. I'm gonna say both these teams. I'm gonna say the Clippers, Mavericks. I'm gonna go with the Mavs on that one. I think the Mavs will close it out. But I think with the Cleveland Magic one, I think we're going to Game 7 on this one. It's just been one of those series. I think, just because of how close the last game was, I don't think Orlando's gonna like just get blown off the court or lose the game entirely. Because I think what we're gonna see is probably another monster Paolo game. And instead of Franz maybe taking the last shot to close or, attempting that, maybe we see a Paolo try and, take over in the final closing seconds of the game, which I would love to see. And I think that would kind of be like his welcome to the playoff kind of moment. And I think, to force a game 7 and then go in Cleveland to potentially take the series, I think that would be a huge deal. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. But for the Mavericks, I'm expecting a huge Luka game. I'm assuming Kawhi's not playing.
He's not.
Yeah, okay then. So, yeah, so, if Kawhi's not playing, expecting a huge Luka game, but I'm not expecting this game to be as lopsided as it was last time. I'm expecting this one to be a huge fight because, as we normally see when teams are, when their backs are against the wall, the games are a little bit closer. And I'm expecting, Paul George and James Harden to bounce back just like they did last time they had a horrible game. And I think it's going to be competitive. It's going to be a really competitive game, but I think Luka and Kyrie will probably, just get over the hump. I'm like really expecting a tight, close game back and forth for sure. I think it's going to be, similar to the Knicks game tonight. I think that's how it's going to go down.
I tend to kind of agree with you. The Cavs Magic one is weird because I don't know if Jared Allen plays, but without him, even though he's been good in this series, like at the same time, they had the option of putting Evan Mobley on Paolo, and he pretty much took him. Anytime he was on him, he pretty much took him out of the game. So I don't really know how that goes. Like you said, I think a lot of it depends on you're assuming Orlando at home is going to play a lot better. You're going to get better performances from guys that weren't really that good in Cleveland. Obviously, Cleveland made some adjustments to their rotation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens there. But I feel like I kind of agree with you. I think that the teams, I think that Orlando probably wins game 6 and it goes 7 back to Cleveland. And I think that the Mavs probably close it out. Again, it really just depends on, like you said, I think it's going to be a closer game. It all depends for the Clippers. What are you getting from Paul George and Hart? Because if they're bad, they're going to lose, right?
Yeah.
Like we've seen in this series. If they're solid to good, then they're probably going to win because then like their depth guys are probably going to be able to help them out and carry them over the top. And we don't know because obviously for the Clippers, you know, even if they win this series, does Kawhi still come back? We just don't know because like if he hasn't played since game 2 or whatever it was or 3, I think it was what? Yeah, it was 3. Like, is he even really in any position to come back and play? Like you would think like in a do or die game 6, if he was okay enough to play, like he would play. But if he's not, like I don't know. Like there could just be a scenario where the Clippers kind of just collapse, but who knows? Like that team has been very unpredictable, which is why I kind of went away from them as the season went on, right? Because we thought for a while that they may be the team to challenge the Nuggets in the West, but it doesn't really look like that anymore.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be somebody else.
Another failure of a season for them, I think, especially if they go out sad tomorrow, which should be crazy. And I guess, we covered all the bases for tonight, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much because, around the league, other than, I guess, the weird thing with Patrick Beverley throwing the ball at a fan.
Oh, yeah, that was
right?
pretty funny. Yeah. And Portis trying to get a little unhinged as well. That's a funny duo. They need to keep those two guys together. They're actually hilarious.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird situation. And apparently a lot of people are mad at Beverly because I think he was also talking to a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
He said that she cannot interview him since she doesn't subscribe to his podcast.
Yeah, that guy is hilarious. I'm not gonna say anything crazy, but he is funny. I liked Halliburton's response. If you saw his response on Twitter, he basically re-quoted what Dame said. I think it was what con man somebody, and then he talked about a character from Above the Rim, something like that.
Yeah, because obviously these two teams have had a lot of battles over the course of the season. But to be fair to Indiana, right? You did play a shorthanded Bucks team. So you just got to be careful, right? Because you don't want to be in a scenario where you get torched in the second round against New York.
Yeah.
And you end up getting clowned. But either way, for Indiana, this is valuable playoff experience. So, this is good for them, right? To be able to win the playoff series and then go into the next round. It just, regardless of what happens in the series, you feel good because you have a chance to possibly go to the conference finals after not making the playoffs for, the last 4 years or so.
Yeah, and they'll learn from it, either way, if they win or lose, I think they'll learn from it and come back even stronger, especially considering that they'll be able to make some moves and figure some stuff out.
Right. Shout out to the Pacers. Shout out to the Knicks.
Yeah, shout out to both those teams. It's going to be a really interesting series. I'm not going to say entertaining, but I will say interesting because nobody really knows what the result is going to be. It could go either way, and it's funny how it's all pretty much contingent on Indiana. I don't think anybody has any questions about New York. It's more so about if Indiana shows up and, plays like how they did in the regular season and their offense is stellar, okay, cool. But if they show up like they did in the Bucks series, I think you got a problem on your hands.
TJ Leaf as well.
Oh, God. TJ Leaf, that's funny. All right, well, if that's the case, we covered all the bases for today. We covered all the games. We did all the previews. We've got a episode to record right now. So once again, thank you guys for all the support that you guys do show us. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBC Podcast for more content and updates. And we will see you guys on the next episode.